Alara was a hard-working trader in her past life. Now, she is trapped in the body of a lazy lady in a grand but broken home. Her new parents owe gold to everyone in town. To save them, Alara decides she must catch a rich husband. She treats the ballrooms like a street market, sizing up men by their coin and cents. She aims for the Duke of Ashford, a grumpy man who hates parties. With sharp words and a quick mind, she tricks his rivals, scares off mean gossips, and makes the Duke fall madly in love with her. They say love is unpredictable, and today's story proves it. Welcome to Romance Crave Stories, where every episode is full of passion, secrets, and emotional twists. Let's begin. My last memory was sitting at my large oak desk, counting heavy bags of coin and feeling a sharp pain in my chest. I had spent my whole life trading, building a fortune from dirt, and forgetting to sleep. When I opened my eyes again, I was not in my counting room. I was lying in a bed big enough for a horse, wrapped in pink silk. A girl with a white cap dropped a silver tray on the floor. "My lady, you are awake before noon. Should I fetch the doctor?" I sat up. My head felt heavy, and my limbs felt as weak as wet paper. I looked at my hands. They were soft, with no ink stains. "Who are you?" I asked. "I am Mary, your maid." "Oh, Lady Alara, you fell and hit your head on a tea cart yesterday." Lady Alara. The memories poured in like a spilled jug of wine. I was now Alara, the lazy cake-eating daughter of the Earl of Hoyk. My new family had a grand title, a huge house, and empty pockets. They owed money to the butcher, the baker, and the tailor. I looked at Mary, who was wiping her eyes. "Stop crying. Fetch me a dark dress. Nothing pink." "But my lady, you love pink." "Pink is for pigs and babies. I am going to save this house." I marched downstairs. The halls were beautiful but dusty. I found my new parents in the morning room. My father, the Earl, was trying to balance a silver spoon on his nose. My mother was fanning herself, crying over a pile of letters. "Good morning," I said loudly. My father jumped, dropping the spoon. "Alara, my dear, sweet, sleepy child. Why are you out of bed? Is the house on fire?" "The house is drowning in debt, father," I said, pulling out a chair. "Give me those letters, mother." My mother gasped. "These are bills, Alara. They will give you a headache. Go back to sleep." "If I sleep, we will wake up in the street," I said. I snatched the papers. "Who is Lord Hastings? We owe him £200. He is a very angry man with a big mustache," my father whispered. "I hide in the bushes when he rides by." I rubbed my head. "And what is our plan to pay him?" "I thought perhaps we could find a buried treasure in the garden," my father said with a hopeful smile. I stared at him. "Right. No more spoons. No more treasure hunts. We are going to fix this. Mother, who is the richest man in London right now?" My mother blinked. "Well, the Duke of Ashford, of course. But he is terrible. He does not dance, he does not smile, and he turns away every young lady." "Perfect," I said. "He has money and he is not easy to fool. I like a challenge." Shortly after my breakfast of plain toast, my closest friend arrived. Her name was Lady Jane. She was as quiet as a mouse. "Alara?" Jane peeked into the room. "You are reading a book of numbers?" "Jane, sit down," I ordered. "Tell me everything about the Duke of Ashford." Jane's eyes went wide. "The Duke? He likes nothing. He told Lord Peters that polite society is a cage of fools." I grinned. "A smart man." "But Alara, you said you wanted a husband who would let you sleep all day." "I have had enough sleep," I told her, snapping the heavy book shut. "Jane, my family is ruined. If I do not marry a mountain of gold by winter, my father will be shining shoes for pennies. Help me find a dress that says I am rich enough to ignore him, but pretty enough to make him look twice." We were going to war, and our weapons would be teacups, sharp words, and silk gowns. Chapter 1. We stood in the cold hall, waiting for our old carriage to take us to the first ball of the year. I looked at my family. We looked like a very sad painting. My father was pulling at the tight white cloth around his neck. "I am trapped," he complained, his face turning pink. "Can I take this off? Lord Bampton wears loose shirts. Why can't I?" "Lord Bampton also has a stone castle and a massive herd of fat cows," I told him, slapping his hand away and fixing his collar. "Until we have our own fat cows, you will wear the tight collar. Stand up straight, father. You are an earl, not a sad sack of flour." My mother walked in. She wore an old green dress that she had tried to make pretty with new lace. She looked like a very tired cabbage. "Alara, please," she begged, twisting her hands together. "Do not say rude things tonight. Smile. If you scare away Lord Pimpleton, we are truly ruined. Lord Pimpleton is old enough to be my grandfather and smells like sour milk, I said, putting on my cheap gloves. I am not marrying a man who might turn to dust if I sneeze on him. We are aiming much higher, Mother. Behind my mother stood my younger sister, Rose. Rose was wearing pale yellow and shaking like a leaf in the wind. She was trying to hide behind a tall, dead plant in the corner of the hall. Rose, come out from the leaves, I sighed. You are a girl, not a garden bug. I cannot go, Rose squeaked. She grabbed a branch as if it could save her. What if I step on a duke's foot? What if I forget the steps to the dance? What if I trip and fall into the sweet punch bowl? If you fall in the punch bowl, drink your way out, I said, pulling her away from the plant. Listen to me. The men in that ballroom are not wolves. They are just silly boys with fancy titles and deep pockets. You do not need to be clever tonight. Just smile, nod, and if a man talks too much, tell him his horse is very fine. Men love to talk about their horses. My father gasped, his eyes going wide. That is very good advice. I do love a fine horse. My mother fanned her face so fast her hair blew back. Alara, you used to cry if a boy even looked at you. Now you are acting like a general going to war. Mother, this is a war, I said smoothly, pushing open the heavy front doors. And tonight we are going to take their gold and their pride. Now march. When we finally arrived at the grand ball, I stood at the edge of the bright room with my shy sister. We watched the men walk by. Look at them, Rose, I whispered. It is just like a meat market. Lord Bampton is over there, Rose whispered back, pointing a shaking finger. Good teeth, but his eyes are blank. He would lose my money in a week, I noted. Just then my mother rushed over, dragging the old, wealthy lord she wanted me to marry. Alara, look who is here to see you, she forced a bright, fake smile. The old man bowed deeply, his bones popping. Lady Alara, you look as sweet as a fresh pie. I looked at the giant, dusty, white mess on his head. And you, my lord, are wearing a wig that looks exactly like a dead cat. My mother gasped wildly and nearly fainted right into a waiter. Rose quickly hid her face behind her fan to cover a loud laugh. I smiled. The great hunt had begun. Chapter 2. The grand hall was a sea of bright silk, shining jewels, and far too much heavy perfume. The string music was loud, but not as loud as the whispers and gossip. This was the battlefield, and I was ready to conquer it. At my first ball, I stood at the edge of the room with Jane, pointing at men. Lord Bampton. Good teeth, but his eyes are blank. He would lose my money in a week. Jane giggled, hiding her face behind her fan. My mother nearly fainted when I told a wealthy older lord that his wig looked like a dead cat. My mother, having recovered from her near swoon, slapped my arm with her closed fan. Alara, you are going to ruin us before the first dance. That was Lord Pimpleton, and he has a very large estate. He will survive, Mother, I told her, fixing my cheap lace gloves. And if he does not, well, he should not have worn a dead animal on his head. I think I saw a moth fly out of it. Jane laughed so hard she choked on a small sugar cake, and my sister Rose had to pat her back. Rose looked terrified. Alara, people are staring at us, she whispered, trying to hide behind my shoulder. Let them stare, I said proudly. We are not here to hide in the shadows like mice. You must stop playing games, my mother hissed, pulling Rose away to safety. Find a good, simple man who will pay our debts. But I did not want a simple man. A simple man could not pull my family out of the deep mud we were in. I needed a king, or at least a very rich, very smart lord who understood the art of a sharp bargain. I looked across the crowded room, searching for the biggest prize. Then I saw the Duke of Ashford. He was tall, dressed in dark blue, and looking at the crowd with deep anger. He sat in a large chair in the corner. People walked around him as if he were a sleeping bear. No one dared to speak to him, not even the bravest, most desperate mothers. His friend, a man in a terribly bright yellow coat, said something to the Duke, shook his head, and quickly walked away. This was my chance. A mountain of gold, sitting all alone. I handed my punch cup to Jane. Hold this. I am going to poke the bear. Alara, no. Jane gasped, her eyes wide with terror as she grabbed my wrist. He is awful. They say he threw a man out of a window in France. I am sure the window was open, I said, pulling my arm free and smoothing my skirts. I walked straight over and sat in the chair next to him, which his friend had just left. You are blocking the light, Your Grace, I said smoothly. He stared at me, shocked that I did not bow or shake. Who are you, he grumbled. The woman who is about to take your peace and quiet, I replied. The Duke blinked. His dark eyes moved over my face, searching for a single drop of fear. When he found none, his heavy brow slowly raised. You are sitting in my friend's chair. Your friend has poor taste in yellow cloth and has run away, I pointed out, spreading my fan with a sharp snap. I, however, have excellent taste and no fear of grumpy men sitting in dark corners. He let out a sound that was half a cough and half a laugh. It was a rough sound, as if he did not use it often. You are the Earl of Hoyk's daughter. The lazy one. I prefer to call it resting before a great battle, I countered, looking him right in the eye. And you are the Duke who hates music, dancing and joy. I do not hate joy, he said, his voice deep and rough like heavy stone. I just hate fools and women who only want my coin. Then we have something in common, I smiled, turning my head to look at the crowded dance floor. Shall we judge the fools together? He did not call his guards to throw me out. He did not yell. Instead, he leaned back in his great chair, crossing his arms over his broad chest, a tiny spark of amusement in his eyes. Very well, Lady Alara, he rumbled. Tell me exactly what you think of Lord Bampton. It was a test. And I, who had never lost a bargain in my life, was entirely ready to win. Chapter 3. My mother paced the worn carpet of our sitting room, snapping her lace fan open and shut. She looked like a nervous bird preparing for flight. The art of the catch, Alara, is all in the fan, she instructed, walking back and forth. If you see a wealthy man, you flutter it near your chin, look away shyly, and then oops. She tossed the fan onto the floor. You drop it. He bends down to pick it up, your eyes meet, and suddenly he is asking your father for your hand. I stared at the little pile of sticks and feathers on the rug. Mother, if I drop that, a passing dog is more likely to pick it up than a duke. Fans are too light. Men like Ashford do not notice feathers. What will you drop then? My father asked from his armchair. He was currently trying to teach his hunting dog how to balance a piece of cheese on its nose. The dog ate the cheese. A chair? A serving tray? Oh, drop a whole roast pig. That would certainly catch my attention. You are not a duke, father, I sighed. I left the room and marched straight into his dusty library. I needed a heavy weapon to catch a heavy prize. I searched the shelves until I found it. A guide to royal land laws and farming taxes. It was bound in thick leather and looked heavy enough to stop a cannonball. When I brought it out to the hall, my sister Rose let out a tiny scream. Alara, you cannot bring a book to Lady Hathersham's tea party. Books give people headaches. I tried to read that exact book 10 years ago, my father added, shaking his head. I fell asleep so fast I hit my chin on the desk. It is a cursed object, Alara. Put it back. This is not for reading, I said, tucking the massive block under my arm. This is a trap. Lady Hathersham's tea party was a sea of pastel dresses, tiny sweet cakes, and endless, boring chatter. I stood near a large marble pillar, holding my book like a shield. I ignored the strange looks from the other ladies. I was hunting. Presently, I spotted him. The Duke of Ashford was walking through the room, looking entirely miserable. A group of giggling mothers and daughters were trying to block his path, but he moved past them with cold, dark glares. He was heading for the quiet gardens. I timed my steps perfectly. I walked into his path just as he reached the grand double doors. I gave him a sweet smile, let my arms go limp, and dropped the massive book. Thud. It landed loudly directly on his shiny black boot. The entire room went dead silent. A lady near the sweet cakes dropped her teacup. Ashford froze. He did not yell, but his eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. His jaw clenched tight as he slowly looked down at the brick of a book sitting on his foot, and then slowly looked back up at me. A light red, my lady? He asked, his deep voice carrying through the quiet room. He bent down and rubbed his boot. I like to know the rules before I break them, your grace. I smiled sweetly. He stared at my face. Then he looked at the title of the heavy book. The corners of his mouth twitched. He picked the book up with one large hand and to the absolute shock of the entire room, he threw his head back and actually laughed. The sound was rich and warm, filling the silent hall. Lady Hathersham looked as though she might faint into the rose bushes. Land laws? He chuckled, handing the book back to me. His fingers brushed against my glove, sending a strange, warm spark up my arm. Are you planning to steal my fields, Lady Alara? Only if you leave them unguarded, I told him, taking the book. He leaned in close, his eyes dancing with a fire I had not seen before. I will be sure to put extra locks on my gates then, he whispered. For you are clearly a very dangerous woman. He bowed a real proper bow, and walked into the garden, leaving me holding my book, entirely victorious. Chapter 4. The morning sun was shining, but my mood was as dark as a storm cloud. I was sitting at a wobbly table in the parlor, staring at a very long bill from the town baker. How could 4 people eat so many meat pies in a single month? My mother burst into the room. Her hair was half-pinned, and she was waving her hands wildly like a drowning sailor. He is here. The dark carriage. The huge black horses. The bear has come to our house. Mother, speak plainly, I said, dipping my quill in the ink pot. Has a wild animal escaped the king's zoo? The Duke of Ashford is walking up our front steps, she shrieked. And your father is in the corner playing with dead things. I dropped the quill. A duke did not make morning calls to ruined estates unless he was very angry or very interested. I smoothed my simple blue day dress, pinched my cheeks to bring some color to them, and hurried to the center of the room. I arrived just as our tired, old butler opened the heavy doors. The Duke of Ashford stepped into our parlor. He looked entirely too large and too rich for the faded room. His dark coat was made of fine wool, and his boots were polished to a mirror shine. He looked around at the dusty curtains and the chipped teacups with a raised brow. My father, who had been sitting on the floor by the window, jumped up in absolute terror. He was holding a small wooden box. He looked at the tall, grim Duke, and his mind simply broke. Look, my father blurted out, shoving the wooden box right under the Duke's nose. This one is shiny. I found him near the rose bushes. Inside the box was a collection of dead, pinned beetles. Ashford froze. He stared down at the giant green bug. He looked at my father as if the Earl were a madman wandering the streets. This was a disaster. If Ashford thought my family was mad, he would never offer his coin or his name. A good trader knows how to turn dirt into gold, so I stepped smoothly between them, blocking the box from view. My father is a brilliant man, your grace, I said, putting a firm hand over the wooden box and pushing it down. He knows that bugs are the silent thieves of the fields. They ruin the wheat crops. We were just having a very deep talk about how to save the autumn harvest. Ashford slowly lifted his dark eyes from the dead beetle to my face. He knew I was lying. I could see the amusement dancing in his dark eyes, bright and sharp. Is that so? Ashford asked, his deep voice thick with dry humor. I had no idea the Earl was such a master of the soil. Tell me, Hoyk, what is your plan for the little green beasts? My father opened his mouth, squeaked like a frightened mouse, and sat down hard in his favorite armchair, clutching the box to his chest. My father prefers to let me speak for him on matters of trade. I jumped in quickly, gesturing to the heavy sofa. Please sit. Tell me how your own wheat fields are growing. I hear the soil in your northern lands is difficult and full of rocks. Ashford's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. He took a seat on the sofa, stretching his long legs out. He did not ask about my mother, who had hidden behind a tall plant, or my shy sister. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees, and looked at me with sharp, hungry eyes. The soil is heavy, he agreed softly. It takes a strong hand to make things grow there. Just like it takes a strong mind to turn a box of dead bugs into a brilliant farming plan. I sat across from him, resting my chin on my hand. A smart woman uses whatever tools she has, your grace. For the next hour, we did not speak of dances or poetry, or the silly gossip of the town. We spoke of wheat, heavy rains, and the cost of good plows. We argued over the best way to rest the soil, throwing sharp words back and forth like swords. It was the most fun I had had since waking up in this strange body. Every time I made a good point, Ashford's eyes would darken, and he would lean a little closer to me. The space between us grew warm and electric. Suddenly, a loud noise broke the quiet tension. Snort. We both turned our heads. My father had fallen fast asleep in his armchair, his mouth wide open, the box of beetles resting peacefully on his stomach. Ashford looked at my sleeping father, then back at me. He stood up, towering over me in the small parlor. I must go, he said, his voice dropping to a low whisper that made my stomach flutter. I have much to think about. And I find that when I am near you, Lady Alara, I cannot think straight at all. He took my hand, his thumb brushing my skin, and kissed my knuckles. He lingered just a second too long, leaving me standing in the faded parlor, smiling like a fool. Chapter 5. The bright drawing room of Lord Peters was packed with ladies drinking sweet tea and trading sharp whispers. My friend Jane held tightly to my arm, her eyes darting around the room like a scared rabbit. I was wearing my best dark plum dress. It was my best dress because it was my only dark dress, and Mary the maid had spent 3 days hiding the worn spots with clever bits of black lace. I felt like a queen in it, but I knew the wealthy ladies of the town would see right through the threadbare silk. Do not look now, Alara, Jane whispered, hiding her mouth behind a tiny painted fan. But Lady Clara is staring at you. And she looks like a cat who just spotted a fat mouse. I did not hide. I turned and looked right at Lady Clara. Clara was the cruelest, richest girl in our circle. She wore a bright pink gown that made her look exactly like a giant, frosted sweet cake. She wanted to marry the Duke of Ashford, and she hated anyone who even looked at his dark carriage. Clara marched across the room, followed by 3 of her giggling friends. The other ladies went quiet, waiting for the show to begin. "Elara, darling," Clara purred, her voice dripping with fake honey. "I did not think you would come out today. Are you not usually sleeping at this hour?" "I woke up early just to see your lovely face, Clara." I smiled, holding my teacup steady. Clara let out a short, mean laugh. Her eyes scanned my dress, her nose wrinkling as if she smelled old fish. "What a creative gown. It looks terribly heavy. Did your maid sew that in the dark, Elara? Or did you simply take down the old curtains from your haunted house and wrap them around your waist?" Her friends giggled softly, covering their mouths. Jane shrank back, her face turning red for me. The room fell into a heavy silence. Everyone waited to see me cry or run away, as the old Elara would have done. I did not run. I took a slow sip of my tea. Then, I stepped closer to Clara and looked very closely at the giant, sparkling stones around her neck. "My maid did sew it in the dark, Clara," I said loudly, my voice ringing clear across the silent room. "We must save on candles, you see. But tell me, did your jeweler make that heavy necklace out of window glass? Or did he simply melt down old bottles to save you a few pennies?" Clara's jaw dropped open. Her face turned the color of a boiled root. She grabbed the stones at her neck, too shocked to speak. Before her friends could jump to her defense, a low, rumbling sound broke the silence. "Ah." It was a deep, rich laugh that came from the shadowy corner by the tall windows. The crowd parted, and the Duke of Ashford stepped into the light. He held a teacup in one large hand, his dark eyes fixed entirely on me. He looked wildly amused. "A fair question, Lady Clara," Ashford said smoothly, his voice carrying an easy power that made the mean girls freeze in their tracks. "Though I must say, glass or not, it does not shine half as brightly as Lady Elara's wit." Clara looked as if she might swallow her own tongue. She bowed quickly and ran off toward the sweet cakes, her friends rushing behind her like baby ducks. Ashford walked slowly toward me, stopping so close I could smell the sharp scent of cedar and clean rain on his coat. He did not look at my worn lace or my old silk. He looked at me as if I were wearing a crown of stars. "You are a very cruel creature, Lady Elara," he murmured, a slow smile touching his lips. "I am a mirror, your grace," I replied, looking up into his dark eyes. "I only give back what is given to me." He chuckled again, leaning down just enough so only I could hear. "Then I must be very careful to give you only sweet things." He offered me his arm, completely ignoring every other wealthy lady in the room, and led me to the gardens, leaving the gossips to whisper about nothing else for the rest of the year. Chapter 6. The music played loudly in the great hall of Lord and Lady Smith. I stood by the punch bowl, handing a silver cup to Jane. Jane pulled on my sleeve, her face pale. "Elara, he is coming back." "Who?" I asked, turning around. "Lord Farley," Jane whispered. She tried to hide behind a tall stone pillar. "He is awful. He smells like old cheese and he keeps trying to trap me in corners. I just want to speak with Sir Thomas. Sir Thomas has a very kind smile and a gentle horse." I looked across the room. Sir Thomas was a quiet, rich man standing safely near the flowers. Lord Farley was a greasy man with bad teeth, pushing his way through the crowd right toward Jane. "Go to Sir Thomas," I ordered Jane. "Smile at him. I will stop the cheese man." "But what will you do?" Jane asked. "Just walk," I said. Jane hurried over to Sir Thomas. Lord Farley saw her move, and changed his path to follow her. I stepped right in front of him, acting like a solid stone wall in a silk dress. "Lord Farley," I said, my voice bright and very, very loud. He stopped, highly annoyed. "Lady Elara, please step aside. I wish to speak to Lady Jane." "I am so glad to see you walking," I cried out, throwing my hands up. A few people nearby turned their heads to listen. After what the doctor told us, we were all so worried. Lord Farley blinked, confused. "The doctor? What are you talking about?" I took a step closer and spoke even louder. "Your terrible rash, my lord. The weeping, red spots all over your legs. The doctor said it was the worst he had ever seen." A wealthy lady standing next to us gasped loudly, and pulled her silk skirts away from his boots. Lord Farley turned bright red. "I do not have a rash," he hissed, looking around at the staring faces. There is no need to be brave, I said gently. Is it true that it spreads if you stand too close to people? Oh dear. We must give you space. I took 3 large steps back. The people around us quickly did the same. Suddenly, Lord Farley was standing in a wide, empty circle. No one would go near him. He looked like a cornered rat. You are mad, he sputtered. He turned around and ran straight out of the grand hall, his face burning with absolute shame. I smiled and brushed off my hands. A brilliant move, little bird. I spun around. The Duke of Ashford was leaning against the sweeping wooden stairs. He was watching me, his arms crossed over his chest, his dark eyes glowing with a mix of surprise and deep respect. Were you spying on me, Your Grace? I asked, walking over to the stairs. I always watch the most dangerous person in the room, he replied. He slowly walked down 2 steps until he was standing just above me. The height made him look even bigger, but I did not step back. He was bothering my friend. I told him plainly. Ashford tilted his head. You are very fierce for a girl who used to sleep all day. You fight like a wildcat for a quiet mouse. I looked right into his dark eyes. The air between us suddenly felt very warm and thick. I protect what is mine, Your Grace. Whether it is my family, my friend, or my home. I do not let bad men win. Ashford stared at my face for a long moment. He reached out and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. His strong fingers were rough but surprisingly soft against my skin. I pity any man who tries to take what is yours, Alara, he whispered, his voice low and heavy. And I greatly envy anyone who belongs to you. He slowly let his hand drop and walked back up the stairs, leaving my heart beating as fast as a running horse. Chapter 7. The morning air was quiet, broken only by the sound of birds and a very loud, very angry man shouting in my garden. I was walking along the stone path, holding a cup of hot tea, when I heard the terrible noise. I followed the sound to the wild rose bushes. There, trapped against a stone birdbath, was my father. He was holding his gardening shears like a tiny shield. Standing over him was Lord Hastings. He was a round man with a red face and a giant, bristly mustache that looked like a very angry caterpillar sitting on his lip. I want my gold, Hoik, Lord Hastings roared, waving a piece of paper in my father's face. You owe me 200 pounds. If you do not pay me by tomorrow, I will take your fine carriage and your best horses. Please do not shout, my father squeaked, leaning back so far he nearly fell into the dirty water of the birdbath. You will scare the beetles. They are sleeping under the leaves. I do not care about your bugs. Hastings yelled, stepping closer. I want my coin. I took a slow sip of my tea. It was time to work. I stepped out from the shadows of the tall trees. Good morning, Lord Hastings, I said, my voice as cold and smooth as a frozen pond. Hastings spun around, his mustache twitching. Lady Alara, stay out of this. This is men's business. I am afraid it is my business, I said, walking right up to him. I did not stop until I was standing between him and my trembling father. And if you ever shout at the Earl in his own garden again, I will ruin you. Hastings laughed loudly, a cruel barking sound. You? A ruined, lazy girl? How will you ruin me? By sleeping on my steps. I did not blink. I leaned in and spoke in a very quiet, very sharp whisper. I will tell the whole town about the false horses you sold to the King's Guard. The ones you painted black to hide their gray spots. The ones that washed clean in the first heavy rain. Hastings' mouth snapped shut. The red color drained from his face, until he looked like a glass of milk. His mustache stopped moving. I do not know what you mean, he stammered, taking a large step back. I mean, I smiled, showing all my teeth, that if you do not give us 3 more months to pay this debt, the King's Guard will be very interested to know who tricked them out of their heavy coin. Shall I send them a letter today? Hastings stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. He looked at my father, who was still holding his tiny shears, and then back at me. 3 months, Hastings whispered. He turned around and ran as fast as his short legs could carry him, pushing through the iron gates and out of sight. My father let out a huge breath and dropped his shears. Alara, how did you know about the painted horses? Jane's brother is in the guard. He talks too much when he drinks wine, I said simply. Do you need a sword, my lady, or is the teacup deadly enough? I spun around. Stepping out from behind a large oak tree was the Duke of Ashford. He was dressed in riding leathers, looking massive and entirely at ease. A dark, wicked smile played on his lips. How long have you been hiding in my trees, Your Grace? I asked, trying to slow my racing heart. Long enough to see you strike a man down without ever raising your hand, he said, walking slowly toward me. You are terrifying. Do you need help? He asked, stopping just an inch from my dress. He looked down at me, the humor in his eyes shifting into something much hotter and heavier. No, I said, looking right back up at him. But you can hold my cup. I pushed the painted teacup into his large chest. He caught it easily with one hand. Before I could step away, his free hand caught my waist, pulling me firmly against him. My breath caught in my throat. I will hold your cup, Ashford whispered softly, his face coming so close I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. But you must promise to stop fighting all your battles alone. Some of us want to fight for you. He let go of my waist, bowed slightly over the teacup, and walked toward the house to speak with my father, leaving me rooted to the garden path, completely breathless. Chapter 8. The heavy wooden doors of my home opened to reveal the Duke of Ashford. He was standing on my steps, holding the leather straps of two massive horses. One was as black as midnight, and the other was a light brown mare. Good morning, Lady Alara, Ashford called out, his deep voice carrying over the quiet street. You told me once that you fear nothing. Come ride with me in the King's Park. I am afraid of nothing, I called back, stepping out in a dark green riding dress I had borrowed from Jane. I walked down the stone steps with my head held high. I did not mention that I had never ridden a horse in my entire life. A good trader never shows her empty pockets. I stopped in front of the brown mare. It looked much larger up close. Its large, dark eyes stared at me. Her name is Buttercup, Ashford said, stepping close to my side. She is the gentlest mare in my stable. She looks as though she eats raw meat, I muttered. Are you certain she is not a cow in disguise? Ashford chuckled, a low warm sound. Without a word of warning, he put his large hands on my waist and lifted me straight up into the saddle. My breath caught as his strong fingers held me. Take the leather straps, he instructed, placing the rough reins into my hands. His fingers brushed over mine, lingering for a second. Hold them lightly. If you pull too hard, she will think you are angry. I am angry. We are far too high off the ground, I said, gripping the leather as if it were a bag of gold. Ashford mounted his giant black horse in one smooth, easy motion. He looked like a king going to war, while I felt like a sack of flour tied to a barrel. We rode slowly into the park. The trees were green and the path was wide. For a while, we walked in peaceful silence. You are very quiet today, Alara, Ashford noted, his dark eyes watching me closely. And you are sitting as stiff as a board. I am enjoying the fresh air, I lied, staring directly at Buttercup's ears. I am a perfect rider. I simply prefer my own 2 feet. Down there. On the dirt. He smiled warmly. You are doing very well. Just relax your shoulders. Yip, yip, yip. A tiny, white, fluffy dog suddenly burst out of the bushes. It ran right at Buttercup's legs, barking loudly. Buttercup did not like the fluffy dog. She let out a loud sound, raised her front legs, and took off running down the path like a fired cannonball. Ah! I screamed, dropping the leather straps immediately. I threw my arms around the horse's thick neck and held on for my life. Alara! Ashford shouted from behind me. The wind tore at my hair. The trees became a green blur. I was bouncing in the saddle like a loose bean. Stop, you terrible giant! I yelled into the horse's mane. Halt! If you do not stop this instant, I will sell you to the butcher for a single penny. You son of a mud-eating pig. The sound of heavy, thunderous hooves rushed up beside me. Ashford's black horse pulled equal with my runaway mare. Ashford reached out with one long, powerful arm and grabbed Buttercup's leather straps. He pulled hard, speaking sharp, calming words. Buttercup slowed, dancing on her feet, and finally came to a stop. My arms were weak. My head spun. I slipped in the saddle, falling completely to the side. I did not hit the ground. Ashford threw himself out of his saddle and caught me out of the air. He pulled me flush against his hard chest, wrapping his arms around me so tightly I could hear the rapid beating of his heart. I was shaking from head to toe. I buried my face into the rough wool of his coat. That beast has no manners. I yelled, my voice trembling. She is a monster. Ashford let out a shaky breath and buried his face in my messy hair. He held me fiercely, smoothing his hand down my back. I have you, he whispered, his voice thick with fear and relief. You are safe now, little bird. I will never let you fall. We stood there on the dirt path, wrapped in each other's arms, completely ignoring the horses, the park, and the tiny white dog watching us from the bushes. Chapter 9. I was trapped. Not by a bad marriage or a hungry bear, but by the angry sky. A sudden, heavy rainstorm had trapped my family inside the grand country home of the Duke of Ashford. My mother and father were fast asleep by the fire in the drawing room, tired from our long afternoon visit. I, however, was wide awake. I wandered into the Duke's great library. The room was massive, filled with the rich smell of old paper, leather, and wood smoke. In the center of the room sat a huge oak desk, and on that desk was an open ledger of numbers. A good trader never ignores an open book. I walked over and began reading his farm accounts. I frowned, dipping my finger on the page. Foolish, I muttered to myself. Completely foolish. Are you stealing my coin, or simply judging how I spend it? I jumped. Ashford was leaning against the heavy wooden door frame. He wore no coat, only a loose white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked wilder than usual, his dark hair slightly damp from the rain. I am weeping for your poor choices, Your Grace, I said, tapping the heavy page. Look at this. You pay the men who cut your wheat a single silver coin a week. It is not enough. He walked slowly into the room, his boots making no sound on the thick rug. It is the exact wage every lord pays his field workers. Why should I pay more? Because a hungry man works slowly, I argued, crossing my arms. If you pay them 2 silver coins, they will eat meat. A man full of meat swings a heavy blade twice as fast. You will bring your harvest in before the autumn storms ruin the crop. You spend a few extra coins now, but you save 100 pieces of gold later. Ashford stopped on the other side of the desk. He leaned over the wood, resting his hands flat on the edges. His dark eyes locked onto mine. You would throw my silver away on a gamble? It is not a gamble. It is simple sense, I said, refusing to back down. I leaned over the desk too, mirroring his sharp pose. You are rich, but you are running your lands like a miser saving candle wax while the house burns down. He let out a low breath and walked around the heavy desk. He did not stop until he was standing directly in front of me. The room suddenly felt very small. The sound of the heavy rain beating against the tall glass windows faded away. He took another step. I had to tilt my head back to look at his face. His chest brushed against my silk dress. The heat coming off him was like a roaring hearth fire. You think you know everything, Ilara, he whispered. His voice was rough, scraping against the quiet air of the library. I did not move away. I held my ground, even as my knees turned to water. I know I am right, I whispered back. Ashford slowly lifted his hand. He did not grab my waist or my arms. Instead, he gently touched my cheek with his knuckles. His fingers traced the line of my jaw, soft and slow, a complete contrast to his fierce, dark eyes. You are entirely maddening, he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. And you are entirely stubborn, I breathed. He leaned in closer, his nose brushing mine. I forgot all about the wheat. I forgot about the ledgers, the silver coins, and the rain outside. I closed my eyes, waiting for his kiss, feeling the wild, heavy beating of my own heart. Just then a loud, terrible snore echoed from the hallway. My father had woken up. Ashford stopped, a heavy sigh escaping his chest. He rested his forehead against mine for one brief, burning second before taking a step back. Tomorrow, he said, his voice thick with unspoken promises. I will raise their wages tomorrow. And then, little bird, you and I are going to have a very long talk about the future. Chapter 10. My mother was pacing the parlor rug so quickly I feared she might burn a hole straight through the floorboards. The Duke is playing games, Ilara, she cried out, waving her arms. It has been a full day since the rainstorm, and he has not sent a ring. We cannot wait for him to make up his mind. Winter is coming, and we do not have enough coal. I have invited a second choice. A second choice? I asked, looking up from my book. Mother, I am catching a duke. I do not need a second choice. You need a husband, she insisted. And Baron Grimsby has 3 stone houses and a very large pile of gold. Before I could argue, the parlor doors opened. In walked Baron Grimsby. He was a round, red-faced man wrapped in far too much dark green velvet. He looked like a giant mossy rock. Worse, he smelled strongly of boiled cabbage and old dust. Lady Ilara, Baron Grimsby said, his voice wheezing as he bowed. Your mother tells me you are a very quiet, lazy girl. I like a silent wife. My last wife talked too much about the cold. I am as silent as a falling tree, my lord, I said flatly. My mother gave a nervous, high-pitched laugh and practically shoved the Baron onto the small sofa next to me. He sat much too close. I could hear him breathing heavily through his nose. Our tired butler walked in carrying a silver tray with tiny, pink-painted teacups. He set the tray down. Such soft hands, the Baron said suddenly. He reached out and grabbed my hand with his sweaty fingers. You will look lovely sitting quietly by my fire, never speaking a word. He pulled my hand to his mouth and pressed a wet, heavy kiss to my knuckles. At that exact moment, the heavy parlor doors swung open again. The Duke of Ashford stood in the doorway. He was dressed in a dark riding coat, looking like a fierce storm cloud that had blown right into our house. He reached out and absent-mindedly picked up one of the tiny pink teacups from the tray near the door as he looked up. Then he saw the Baron's wet lips on my hand. Ashford stopped breathing. His dark eyes turned completely black. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles ticked in his cheek. Crack. The tiny pink teacup shattered into a dozen sharp pieces inside Ashford's large gloved hand. Hot tea and painted porcelain rained down onto the wooden floor. My mother screamed and hid behind a large chair. Baron Grimsby dropped my hand as if it had caught fire. He looked at the massive, furious Duke, then at the broken cup on the floor. "Alara is busy," Ashford said. His voice was not loud, but it was so cold and dangerous it made the hairs on my arms stand up. "She will not be sitting by your fire. Now leave." The Baron did not say a word. He stood up so fast his velvet coat ripped, and he ran out of the parlor as fast as a frightened rabbit. Ashford pulled off his wet leather glove and threw it onto the tray. He walked slowly across the room, completely ignoring my mother, who was currently pretending to faint in the corner. He stopped in front of me, took out a clean, white linen cloth from his coat, and gently took the hand the Baron had just kissed. "I leave you alone for one morning," Ashford murmured, rubbing the linen fiercely over my knuckles to wipe away the Baron's touch. "And you are already collecting wealthy fools." He smelled like boiled cabbage. I told him, looking up into his angry, beautiful eyes. "You saved me from a terrible fate." Ashford dropped the cloth and laced his warm fingers firmly through mine. "I am not going to save you, Alara. I am going to keep you entirely for myself." Chapter 11. The letter arrived early in the morning, sealed with heavy black wax. It was a formal invitation to tea from Lady Augusta, the Dowager Duchess and Ashford's terrifying aunt. My mother took one look at the grand crest pressed into the wax, and immediately tried to hide behind the parlor curtains. "She eats young ladies for breakfast, Alara," my father warned, holding his favorite garden beetle close to his chest for comfort. "She is a dragon. She once made a grown man cry just by looking at his boots. You must tell her you are sick. Tell her you have the spotted fever." I smoothed down the skirt of my dark plum dress. "Tell the cook to hold my morning toast. I will be eating the Dowager's sweet cakes instead." Lady Augusta's grand townhouse was as dark and heavy as a tomb. A silent, terrified maid led me into a large sitting room filled with shadows and stuffed, dead animals staring down with glass eyes. Sitting in the center of the room, looking very much like an angry hawk ready to strike, was Lady Augusta. She wore stiff black silk, her silver hair piled high. Her hands rested on a walking stick topped with a silver wolf's head. "Sit," she barked. "Set." I arranged my skirts gracefully, completely ignoring the giant stuffed bear looming right behind my chair. "You are the Earl of Hoyke's lazy daughter," Lady Augusta stated, leaning forward. Her eyes were exactly like Ashford's, dark, piercing, and entirely dangerous. "Your father is a fool who chases bugs in the dirt. Your house is falling down. And now you have set your greedy trap for my nephew." The maid poured tea with violently shaking hands, spilling a few drops onto the saucer. I calmly picked up my teacup, took a slow sip, and set it down without a sound. "The tea is excellent, Your Grace," I said politely, "though the cakes look a bit dry. Did your cook leave them too near the fire?" Lady Augusta slammed her walking stick onto the floorboards. "Bang! Do not play games with me, girl," she snapped. "I know exactly what you are. You are ruined. You are poor. You only want his gold to save your own skin." I set my cup down gently. I did not shrink back. I looked the fierce old woman directly in her hawkish eyes. "Yes, I am poor," I said plainly, my voice steady. "And yes, I want his gold. I will not lie to you, Your Grace. But I am also the only woman in this city brave enough to keep him in line." The Dowager blinked. The maid gasped quietly from the corner. No one had ever spoken to the fearsome Aunt Augusta like this. "You are bold, you little mouse," she whispered dangerously. "I am a lion, Your Grace," I corrected, taking one of the dry cakes and taking a bite. "Your nephew is a wild, brilliant man. If he marries a quiet, fearful girl who only knows how to sew pillows and weep when the wind blows, he will die of absolute boredom in a year. He needs a woman who can stand her ground. He needs a partner who knows how to guard his house, rule his lands, and double his coin. You know I am right." The room fell into a heavy, absolute silence. The glass eyes of the stuffed bear seemed to stare at me. Lady Augusta stared at my face. Her jaw was locked tight. Her dark eyes searched mine for any sign of fear or weakness. I held my chin high, kept my back completely straight, and did not blink. Suddenly, Lady Augusta raised her wrinkled hand and slapped the heavy wooden table, so hard the teacups jumped into the air. "Ha!" she shouted. A wide, terrifying smile broke across her wrinkled face. "I like her. Finally, a girl who does not weep into her tea when I speak. I told you she was a wildcat, Aunt." I turned my head. Ashford was leaning against the heavy wooden door frame, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. He was looking entirely too handsome in a dark gray coat, a wicked, proud smile playing on his lips. He had been watching from the shadows the entire time. "Marry her quickly, boy," Lady Augusta ordered, pointing her silver wolf stick at him, "before a smarter man steals her away." Ashford pushed off the door frame and walked slowly into the room, his eyes locking onto mine. A burning, possessive fire danced in his dark depths. "I have no intention of letting anyone steal her, Aunt," he murmured, stopping right behind my chair and resting his warm, heavy hands on my shoulders. "She is already mine." Chapter 12. The Hoyk house was a storm of flying ribbons, dropping hairpins, and nervous energy. The last grand ball of the season had arrived. My mother was weeping tears of pure joy because the town tailor, deeply frightened by my sharp threats to expose his cheap, easily torn thread to the King's Guard, had sent us 3 perfect, shining silk gowns for free. I wore a deep, midnight blue dress that made me look like the night sky. "You look like a queen," my father said, standing straight in his best dark velvet coat. He had actually left his wooden box of bugs in the garden. "But my fine leather shoes are far too tight, Alara. Can I please stay home?" "No, father," I told him, reaching up to fix his white lace collar. "Tonight, we catch the biggest fish in the sea. You must be there to hold the net." My sister Rose walked into the hall holding hands with my friend Jane. They were both giggling loudly. Sir Thomas had officially asked Jane's father for her hand yesterday, and Rose, seeing that men were not wild wolves, was no longer hiding behind tall plants. "I am going to dance 3 times tonight," Rose announced proudly. "You will dance 4 times, I smiled, leading them out the door. "Tonight is our night." The grand hall of the King's Winter Palace was filled with 1,000 candles, shining bright like stars. The string music was loud and fast. As soon as my family walked in, the massive crowd slowly parted. They did not see a ruined, sleepy family anymore. They saw the woman who had chased away the greedy Lord Hastings, terrified the fearsome Dowager Aunt, and tamed the wild Duke of Ashford. Lady Clara stood near the sweet cakes, wearing a terrible orange dress. She glared at me, but when I took a step toward her, she quickly turned around and practically ran into the next room. I smiled with deep satisfaction. But I did not care about the crowd or the mean girls. I only searched the room for one man. I felt him before I saw him. A heavy, warm presence moved up right behind my back. "You are wearing my colors," a deep, rough voice rumbled near my ear. I turned around. Ashford was dressed entirely in black and dark blue, looking so wildly handsome that my breath completely left my body. His dark eyes swept over my midnight silk dress, burning with a fire that made my hands shake slightly. "Blue is very good for trade," I managed to say, holding my chin high. "It shows trust." He laughed softly, stepping close. He did not bow. He did not ask for a dance. He simply reached out, took my hand, and pulled me right through the crowd. He completely ignored the shocked gasps of the wealthy mothers and the wide eyes of the old lords. He led me down a long, quiet, stone hallway and pulled me into a small, dark side room, shutting the heavy wooden door firmly behind us. The room was lit by a single candle, casting long, dancing shadows over his sharp face. "I am entirely tired of this game, Alara," he said, stepping so close I could feel the heat of his skin. I crossed my arms to hide my shaking fingers. "What game, Your Grace? The hunt is only fun if the prey runs." "I stopped running the exact day you dropped a heavy book on my foot," he said, his voice dropping to a thick, low whisper. He reached out, his large, warm hands grabbing my waist and pulling me flush against his hard chest. "Marry me." I looked up into his fierce, dark eyes. "I am a woman of trade. What are your terms? Will you pay my father's heavy debts?" "I will pay every single debt," he promised fiercely, his thumbs rubbing soft circles on my sides. "I will paint your ruined house. I will buy you a beautiful new carriage. I will give you every piece of silver and gold I own." "That is a very good offer," I whispered, my heart beating wildly against my ribs like a trapped bird. "But I have my own term to add." He leaned down, his face hovering just an inch from mine. "Name it. Anything." "The gold is fine, I breathed, uncrossing my arms and wrapping them tightly around his neck. But my term is this. You must give me your whole, entire heart. I will accept nothing less than all of you. A beautiful, true smile broke across his face. He let out a joyous, booming laugh that shook the small room. He wrapped his arms around my waist, lifted me clean off the floor, and spun me around until my silk skirts flew like a storm. When he finally set me down, he did not let me go. He pressed my hand flat against his chest, right over his wildly beating heart, and rested his forehead firmly against mine. It is a deal, my clever little bird, he whispered fiercely, his dark eyes shining with pure devotion. You have had my heart since the moment you stole my chair. Epilogue. 2 years had passed since the night of the king's winter ball, and the world had entirely changed. The heavy stone walls of the Hoyk home no longer held the cold silence of empty pockets. The doors were painted a bright, cheerful red. The halls smelled of roasting meats, fresh sweet cakes, and loud, happy chaos. Thanks to a very generous gift of gold from the Duke, the creditors were paid, and my family was completely safe. My mother now spent her afternoons wrapped in the finest imported lace, drinking rich tea with her new friends. She loved to tell everyone that she had always known the Duke of Ashford was a gentle soul, which was a terrible lie, but I let her tell it. My father was the happiest man in the kingdom. With his debts gone, he had built a giant room made entirely of glass in the center of the garden. It was filled with dirt, warm air, and his beloved beetles. Just yesterday, I watched him trap Jane's new husband, the very polite Sir Thomas, in the glass room for 2 hours to explain the sleeping habits of a large brown moth. Sir Thomas looked deeply terrified, but he nodded the entire time. My sister Rose had not married a duke, but she had married a wealthy, quiet earl who thought her sweet, endless chatter was the finest music in the world. She wore bright yellow dresses every day and no longer hid behind tall plants. As for me, I had a new kingdom to rule. I sat at my massive oak desk in the library of the Duke's grand country estate. The heavy ledger book in front of me was full of very good numbers. By raising the wages of the field workers, we had brought in the autumn harvest a full week before the heavy rains arrived. The storage barns were full of wheat, the workers had fat chickens on their supper tables, and our heavy iron chests were overflowing with silver and gold. The heavy library doors swung open with a loud thud. Ashford walked in. He was wearing his dark riding leathers, and his tall boots were completely covered in thick, wet mud. He brought the sharp smell of rain and pine trees into the warm room. He looked entirely wild, wonderfully handsome, and perfectly happy. You are dropping mud on my clean floors, Your Grace, I pointed out, setting my quill down but making no move to stop him. Ashford looked down at the giant, dirty footprints he was leaving on the expensive woven rug. He did not look sorry at all. He simply smiled a wicked bright flash of teeth, and kept walking straight toward my desk. The floors can be washed, Alara, he rumbled, his deep voice filling the quiet room. But my patience is entirely gone. You have been sitting in this chair since the sun came up. He walked right around the heavy oak desk. He did not ask for permission. He reached down, grabbed me firmly by the waist, and pulled me right out of my large chair. He spun me around in the air once, making my dark silk skirts fly out like a bell, before setting my feet gently back on the ground. He did not let go. He wrapped his strong arms completely around me, pulling my back flush against his warm, broad chest. He rested his heavy chin gently on my shoulder and let out a long, contented sigh. Are you working again, my Duchess? He asked softly, his chest rumbling against my back. Have you not won enough gold for 1 week? I am making us richer, my Duke, I told him, leaning back into his strong embrace. I lifted my hands and placed them over his long, rough fingers that were resting on my waist. We have double the grain we had last year. It is a very good trade. Ashford turned his head and pressed his nose softly against the side of my neck, right where my pulse was jumping. The simple, warm touch sent a wild shiver all the way down to my toes. I made the greatest trade of all, he whispered fiercely, his arms tightening around me like an iron shield. I gave away a few bags of coin, and in return, I was given the fiercest, cleverest woman in the world to guard my home. You also got a father-in-law who brings bugs into your dining room, I reminded him, smiling as I looked at the ledgers. Ashford let out a booming, joyous laugh that shook the room. He turned me around in his arms and pressed his forehead firmly against mine. His dark eyes were shining with absolute, undeniable devotion. I would gladly welcome 1,000 bugs, he swore, his thumbs gently brushing my cheeks, if it meant I could keep you. He swept me entirely off my feet, cradling me easily in his strong arms. I laughed, throwing my arms around his broad shoulders. He carried me away from the desk, marching out of the library with long, purposeful strides, leaving the heavy ledgers, the numbers, and the piles of gold far behind us in the quiet room. That's where this love story ends for now. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more romantic twists. Tell me in the comments what will you have done. Until the next story, keep craving romance.